The Jungle of Luzon, January 1945. Sergeant Miller sat in the steel bucket seat of his M16 half-track, the oppressive humidity clinging to him like a second skin. It was 2 a.m., moonless, and the jungle breathed with a menacing silence. But Miller wasn't scanning the tree line for the enemy. His gaze was fixed on the empty sky, a sky he had grown to despise. As commander of a Quad 50 crew in the 209th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion, Miller's war had been a frustrating mix of boredom and abuse. His weapon, a masterpiece of violence, was to the infantrymen just 50 yards away, nothing but a joke. These were the men of the 25th Division, dug into the muddy ridges, fighting a ghost army. They were exhausted, their feet rotting, their eyes hollow from sleepless terror. Silence was their greatest fear, for it signaled the predator's approach. When they saw Miller high in his turret, scanning for non-existent Japanese planes, they didn't see a soldier. They saw a tourist, a man wasting precious gasoline, a bird watcher. The insults were a constant, bitter refrain. As Miller's half-track rumbled by, riflemen would spit, shouting questions about rare pigeons, or why he wasn't down in the mud with the real men. It was a cruel mockery, born from jealousy and the fear of an enemy that swarmed like ants, preferring a grenade to surrender. To them, the high command had abandoned them, sending bird watchers instead of real support against an enemy that had already lost its air force months ago. Miller absorbed their abuse in silence, but it gnawed at him. He knew what they didn't. They judged the book by its cover. His M16, an awkward top-heavy truck with thin armor, seemed like a fancy toy for a war that had moved on. But Miller knew the weapon mounted on its back, the M45 Maxson quad mount, was arguably the most terrifying piece of engineering the U.S. Army had ever produced. It was a death robot. In an era of bolt-action rifles, the Maxson was a glimpse into the future. 4 M2 Browning .50 caliber machine guns mounted on a single powered turret. A .50 caliber round isn't just a bullet. It's the size of a Sharpie marker. It doesn't punch a hole, it removes whatever body part it hits. It can penetrate a brick wall and still kill a man a mile away. Now, imagine 4 of these heavy barrels, fed by ammunition chests nicknamed tombstones due to their curved shape and immense weight. The true genius lay in the electric motor. A small Briggs & Stratton gas generator hummed, charging batteries that powered the huge motors moving the turret. Miller didn't crank wheels. He held 2 control sticks, like a modern fighter jet. A twitch of his wrist, and the 2,000-pound turret spun instantly, 360 degrees in seconds, snapping from horizon to zenith faster than the eye could follow. Miller was a surgeon, and the quad mount, spitting out 2,000 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition per minute, was his scalpel. When all 4 guns fired, it wasn't a rat-a-tat. It was a low, guttural moan, like canvas ripping 1,000 times over. Designed to shred aluminum airplanes into confetti, here on Luzon, there were no planes. So, Miller sat, listening to the generator hum as the infantry mocked him. The frustration was immense. Miller and his crew knew they possessed the island's most powerful weapon, yet they were forbidden to use it. Army field manuals were clear. Anti-aircraft assets were for air defense, period. The M16 was a glass cannon, its thin armor designed for shrapnel, not rifle bullets. A Japanese sniper could pierce the cab, a mortar shell could turn the crew into hamburger. Experts in the rear believed bringing an M16 to the jungle front was suicide. Too big, too loud, too blind. In the claustrophobic green hell, visibility was mere feet. A half-track on a jungle trail was a sitting duck, easily ambushed. They argued the M16 belonged in Europe or Africa, not the Philippines. It was a liability, they said, just getting in the way of real fighters. The order stood. Keep the bird watchers in the rear, guard bridges and supply dumps. Let the infantry handle the fighting. Miller hated it. He heard the battles at night, saw the artillery flashes, the flares. He knew the rifle companies were getting hammered, that a platoon of Japanese could overrun a foxhole line in minutes. The M1 rifle, good as it was, held only 8 rounds. 100 screaming enemies charging you. 8 rounds were not enough. Miller looked at his quad mount, at the tombstone chests packed with incendiary and armor-piercing rounds. He knew his one quad mount held the firepower of an entire infantry battalion. He could help, but the chain of command was ironclad. Disobeying orders, risking expensive equipment on a hunch. It wasn't done. The useless toys sat in the mud, engines idling, waiting for a war that had passed them by. But the Japanese commander across the line didn't care about American manuals. He saw a weakness near the river crossing, jungle thick enough to hide a massive troop movement. This wasn't a skirmish. He was gathering his strength for a hammer blow, pulling every soldier, cook, clerk, and mechanic into the line. Sake rations were issued, ceremonial headbands distributed. As the sun set, painting the sky a bruised purple, the jungle darkened. Birds fell silent, replaced by the hum of mosquitoes. Miller and his crew were in a reserve position, a few hundred yards behind the main line. Bored, tired of the mockery, they watched darkness consume the jungle, oblivious that the script was about to flip. The experts were wrong. The manual was wrong. In a few hours, Miller's useless toy would become the most vital object on Earth. The hours between midnight and dawn in a war zone are called the witching hour. In the Philippines, it felt like a slowly heating pressure cooker. Sergeant Miller, wiping condensation from his optical sight for the 10th time, had made a quiet decision. He had lowered the massive quad-mount turret until its 4 heavy barrels were parallel with the ground. He knew the regulations, knew an officer would reprimand him, but his gut feeling was stronger. He looked at the ammunition chests. Standard anti-aircraft procedure called for a mix of armor-piercing rounds and a few tracers. But that afternoon, Miller and his crew had done something unauthorized. They repacked the belts, loading them almost entirely with tracers. A tracer, with its small pyrotechnic charge, burns brightly, creating a streak of light. Usually it's 1 tracer for every 5 rounds. Miller had loaded them 1 for 1. He wasn't planning to shoot at a plane. He was planning a light show, a solid beam of fire in the pitch-black jungle. A small MacGyver-like modification, adapting a sky weapon for a ground war. Miller had a feeling he'd need every advantage. 200 yards ahead, the infantry line was suffering. Foxholes filled with water, men sleeping in shifts, clutching rifles. The psychological strain was breaking them. Every rustle, every twig snap sounded like an enemy. The Japanese were masters of psychological warfare, yelling insults, banging rocks to keep the Americans awake, wanting them shivering and exhausted before the first shot. Tonight, the harassment had stopped completely, the worst sign of all. Silence meant they were done playing games. They were getting into position. Deep in the tree line, the Japanese force gathered like water behind a dam. Not a patrol, but a regiment. Thousands of men moving silently through vines, guided by officers sworn to die before sunrise. Stripping off heavy gear, they wouldn't need it. The plan was brutal simplicity. Gyokusai, the shattering of the jewel. Honorable death. Not to capture territory, but to break the American spirit. To throw so many bodies at the line that American machine guns would run out of bullets and barrels would melt. Overwhelm Western technology with Eastern spirit. At 3:15 a.m., the dam broke. Not with a gunshot, but with a low, rising chant, seemingly from the earth itself. Banzai! Banzai! 10,000 years. A salute to the emperor, but here, a scream of death. The jungle exploded. Flares popped, bathing the clearing in sickly yellow light. What the American infantrymen saw made their blood run cold. The tree line had emptied. A solid wall of brown uniforms sprinted across the open ground. No tactics, no cover and fire, just a human flood. The American line opened instantly, deafening. M1 Garands cracked chaotically. BR-men held triggers down, emptying 20-round magazines in seconds. From heavy weapons pits, water-cooled M1917 machine guns began their steady thumping, anchors of defense, firing all day if kept watered. Gunners swept fire, mowing down grass and men. The first wave hit the wall of bullets and collapsed. Bodies piled up. The attack seemed to fail. But the Japanese didn't stop, didn't slow. The second wave ran over the fallen first, using comrades' bodies as stepping stones, screaming, bayonets fixed, running through machine gun fire as if immune. American gunners panicked. You shoot a man, he falls. But these men didn't stop. Hit in the arm, they ran. Hit in the leg, they crawled. Closing fast. 100 yards, 70, 50. Infantry weapon limitations showed. The M1 rifle, good as it was, held only 8 bullets. Fire 8 times, clip ejects with a loud ping. Fumble for a fresh clip, shove it in, slap the bolt. 3 or 4 seconds, fine in a normal fight, an eternity in a Banzai charge. While riflemen reloaded, the Japanese gained 20 yards. The machine guns fared worse. Water-cooled guns fired so continuously the water boiled, steam hissing from valves, barrels glowing dull red. Gunners screamed for ammo, for water, for help. Then, the inevitable. The sheer weight of the attack crushed the line's center. Japanese soldiers with satchel charges and grenades reached machine gun pits. Explosions, then wet, terrible sounds of hand-to-hand combat. The rhythmic thumping of American heavy guns stopped. The anchor was gone. The line buckled, a chain snapping. One link failed. The whole thing came apart. Infantrymen, realizing they were about to be overrun, fell back. No retreat order, it just happened. Men scrambled from foxholes, dropping gear, running for secondary positions. Japanese poured through the gap, fanning out, hunting retreating Americans, throwing grenades into command tents. Chaotic defense became a barroom brawl in the dark. Radio net filled with screaming, platoon leaders begged for artillery, but enemy and friendly were mixed. Shelling meant killing their own. Danger close. The commanding officer saw nothing to plug the hole. Reserves too far. The line was gone. Back at the M16 half-track, Sergeant Miller watched flares drift. No radio needed. He saw tracers from Japanese guns behind American foxholes, heard screams getting closer. The birdwatcher crew was suddenly the only organized unit between the enemy and the supply dump. Miller's driver looked back through the armored slit, eyes wide white circles of fear in a grease-stained face, waiting for the retreat order. The manual said, "If infantry breaks, anti-aircraft assets withdraw to avoid capture. Smart. Safe." Miller looked at the chaos 200 yards away. American soldiers running, dark Japanese shapes swarming the ridge. If he ran, he saved his truck, his crew. But those boys in the mud who mocked him, spat on his tracks, they would be slaughtered. Miller grabbed the intercom, static, humming. He looked at the driver, then the gunner whose hands shook on joysticks, thumbs hovering over butterfly triggers. "Driver, Miller's voice was surprisingly calm above the battle's roar. "Put it in gear." The driver nodded, hand reaching for the shifter. "Reverse, Sarge?" "No," Miller said. "Forward. Get us to the ridge." The driver froze, looked at Miller like he'd lost his mind. Driving a thin-skinned, open-top truck into a Banzai charge was suicide, madness, against every rule. But he saw the look in Miller's eyes. No debate. The driver slammed into first, stomped the gas. Heavy tracks ground mud, churning earth. The M16 lurched forward, engine roaring like an angry beast. As the half-track rumbled out of shadows onto the supply road, retreating infantrymen stopped, stared. They couldn't believe it. The birdwatcher wasn't running. It was driving straight into the enemy's throat. Some waved, screaming at Miller to turn back, yelling the line was gone. Thousands of them. Miller ignored them. He stood in the commander's seat, exposed, watching the tree line near. He tapped the gunner's helmet. "Get ready!" Miller shouted over the engine. "Don't aim, just point!" The gunner gripped controls. Turret whirred, traversing, testing motion. 4 heavy barrels bobbed like snakes, seeking a strike. 50 yards from the breach. Japanese soldiers, bayoneting wounded in foxholes, stopped, looked up. They saw the strange, boxy vehicle lumbering toward them. They didn't know what it was. A supply truck, they thought, lost its way. They raised rifles, laughed. A gift. Another easy kill. They ran toward the half-track, screaming war cries, confident their momentum was unstoppable. They were wrong. They were about to meet the meat chopper. Miller waited until he saw the whites of their eyes, until the mass of brown uniforms was a solid wall. The moment Sergeant Miller's gunners squeezed the butterfly triggers, the concept of a normal infantry battle ceased to exist. In a standard firefight, you hear distinct sounds. Rifle crack, grenade thump, shouted order. But the quad mount created a solid, continuous wall of noise that vibrated chests within 100 yards. 4 heavy machine guns firing out of sync at 2,000 rounds per minute. The human ear stops hearing gunshots. It hears a roar, like massive canvas ripping, or a high-speed drill boring concrete. A mechanical, industrial noise drowning out everything. Screams, explosions, engines. But sound was secondary to light. Miller loaded belts almost entirely with tracers. The M16 didn't just fire bullets. It fired a solid beam of red flame, a fire hose spraying molten lava. In the jungle night's pitch black, this beam was all that mattered. It cut darkness, illuminating rain and smoke with flickering strobe light intensity. The gunner didn't need optical sights, didn't need crosshairs. He just watched the stream of fire, like watering a lawn with a high-pressure hose. Where it touched ground, earth exploded. Where it touched trees, wood shattered. Where it touched the Japanese charge, the enemy simply vanished. The physics of what happened next are hard to grasp from movies. In a movie, a guy gets shot, falls. In reality, a .50 caliber round at 3,000 feet per second hitting a human body is catastrophic. It doesn't just poke a hole. It tears the target apart. Multiply that by 4. The leading wave of the Japanese Banzai charge didn't fall. They were physically pushed backward, kinetic energy so massive it arrested their forward momentum instantly, as if they'd run full speed into an invisible brick wall. The front row lifted off its feet, thrown back into the second, creating a stumbling, chaotic pileup of bodies. The gunner, pure adrenaline and fear, swept the turret left to right. Electric motors whirred, spinning the heavy mount with terrifying speed. The stream of red tracers swept across the jungle, clearing it like a scythe cutting wheat. The birdwatcher turret, designed to track fighters at 300 miles per hour, was now tracking men at 10 miles per hour. Unfair. A mismatch of technological eras. Japanese soldiers carried bolt-action rifles and swords, requiring them to stop, aim, fire, or get within arm's reach. The quad mount reached out, touching them from 200 yards with a finger of death. The jungle itself began to change shape. Heavy rounds hit not just men, but the environment. Thick, tangled vines choking the battlefield severed instantly. Palm trees, some thick as telephone poles, snapped in half. The sheer volume of lead acted like a chainsaw. The gunner was literally mowing the jungle down. Within 60 seconds of opening fire, visibility on the trail improved from 10 feet to 50 yards, because everything standing had been cut down to the mud. Japanese cover evaporated. They stood in an open field that hadn't been there a minute ago, exposed to the unrelenting red beam of the Maxson mount. Inside the half-track, chaos reigned. Vibration so intense Miller held railings to keep teeth from rattling. Floor rapidly filled with hot brass casings. Every .50 caliber round ejected a banana-sized casing. 4 guns firing, casings poured like a metallic waterfall, clattering on steel, burning ankles. The overpowering smell. Burnt gunpowder, hot oil, ozone from overworked electric motors. Muzzle smoke billowed back, stinging eyes, coating faces in black soot. The loader, a kid from Brooklyn who lied about his age, worked harder than anyone. Most physically demanding role. Tombstone chests held 200 rounds. At full cyclic rate, guns ate a chest in 20 seconds. He constantly swapped them. Unlatch empty, throw to floor, grab 100 pounds fresh one, heave onto mount, lock in, feed belt. While turrets spun wildly, truck vibrated like earthquake. Slip, drop a chest, guns go silent, they all die. He moved with frantic, robotic rhythm. Unlatch, toss, lift, lock, feed. Hands blistered, bleeding, burned by hot barrels, but he didn't stop, couldn't stop. Out in the mud, the Japanese attack stalled. Banzai charge momentum relies on terror and speed. Close distance before defenders react. But they couldn't get past the wall of fire Miller laid down. Japanese officers, realizing a frontal assault against the quad mount was suicide, tried to adapt, shouted orders to flank, split up, deeper jungle left and right, trying to get around the cone of fire. Thought vehicle was a tank, slow-moving turret, only one direction. Thought fast enough to the side, they'd hit a blind spot. Fatal mistake. They didn't understand the Maxson mount. The gunner saw flank movement. No crank wheel needed, just twitched wrist. Electric motors screamed, turret snapped 90 degrees left in a fraction of a second. Stream of tracers whipped around, catching flanking squad in the open, cut down before they raised rifles. Then gunner snapped turret 180 degrees right. Guns roared again. Traverse speed terrifying. Faster than a human could run. No blind spots. No safe angle. The birdwatchers saw everything. American infantrymen, retreating, stopped running. Looked over shoulders. Saw red beam cutting darkness. Saw Japanese charge disintegrating. Saw useless supply truck alone on road, fighting an entire regiment. Something changed in them. Panic that broke their line evaporated, replaced by surge of adrenaline and shame. They weren't alone. Tourists were holding the door shut. One by one, riflemen turned, dropped back into mud, raised M1s, fired back toward enemy. Machine gun crews, abandoned jammed weapons, ran back to pits, poured water on barrels, getting them back in fight. American rifle fire joined quad-mount roar. Line reforming. Spine of defense, snapped 10 minutes ago, welding itself back together around M16's burning heart. But the half-track suffered. Barrels critically hot. Machine gun barrels steel, but even steel melts. Firing hundreds of rounds a minute, friction creates immense heat. Barrels glowing bright, angry, cherry red. Could see bullets traveling down bore. Too hot. Rifling strips, bullets tumble wild. Worse, cook-off. Round explodes in chamber before bolt locks, blows gun apart, kills crew. Miller saw the glow, knew they had to cool guns, but couldn't stop firing. Japanese still coming, climbing over dead. Desperate to silence metal beast, Miller grabbed canteen, leaned out commander's seat, exposed to enemy fire, pinging off armor. Poured water directly onto red-hot metal of lower left gun. Water flashed to steam instantly, hissing violently, creating white fog around turret. Not enough. "Keep shooting!" Miller screamed, voice raw. "Burn them out if you have to!" Gunner didn't let up. Triggers depressed, long, punishing bursts, tracers wobbling as barrels warped. But at this range, accuracy didn't matter. Volume. Fill air with so much metal nothing biological survives. Japanese within 30 yards. Miller saw gold teeth of officers screaming orders. Grenade landed near front track, exploding in mud and steel. Shrapnel pinged windshield armor. Driver flinched but foot on brake, platform steady. Battle climax not strategic maneuver, contest of will. Thousands willing to die for Emperor. 3 men in truck willing to burn weapon to save friends. Japanese threw everything into final push. Wave of grenade throwers surged, trying to get within throwing range of open cab. Single grenade into turret tub. Battle over. Gunners saw them. Didn't aim at bodies, aimed at ground in front of feet. Skip technique. Fired .50 caliber rounds into hard-packed mud. Bullets hit ground, ricocheted upward, shattering into fragments, sending spray of rock and jacket fragments into attackers. Like turning ground itself into claymore mine. Grenade throwers went down, explosives detonating harmlessly in dirt. Quad mount roar didn't stop. Piles of brass on floor ankle deep. Paint on gun barrels burned off completely, leaving stark, dead gray. Loader gasping, chest heaving, uniform black with soot. Slammed last set of tombstones into mounts. "Last cans!" he screamed. "We're dry after this." Miller looked at belt. 800 rounds left. 20 seconds of fire. Looked at tree line. Japanese wavering. Relentless mechanical slaughter, finally breaking spirit. Run into buzzsaw. Buzzsaw hadn't jammed. Wall of bodies in front of truck horrifyingly high, testament to meat chopper's efficiency. Survivors looking back at jungle, realizing honor wouldn't stop 50 caliber bullet. "Pour it on!" Miller yelled. "Finish it!" Gunner depressed triggers all the way. 4 guns screamed in unison last time, emptying belts in final blinding crescendo of fire. Red stream lashed out, chasing retreating shadows back into tree line, smashing trees, churning earth, screaming absolute dominance into night. Then, abruptly, Birdwatcher went silent. Belts empty. Motors spun down. Only sound left, hiss of cooling barrels ringing in their ears. Miller grabbed M1 carbine, ready to fight hand-to-hand if they came back. Waited. Infantry waited. Nothing came out of dark. Jungle dead, silent. Tiger declawed. Wednesday morning sunrise brought no warmth to Luzon jungle. Brought visibility, and with it, silence heavier than battle noise. As gray dawn light filtered through smoke, American infantrymen slowly climbed from foxholes. Ghost white, covered in mud, drying blood, eyes sunken deep from night of terror. Like walking corpses, checked bodies for holes, stunned to be breathing. Looked at rifles, empty, grime-covered, then looked at road. What they saw stopped breath in throats. Landscape fundamentally altered. Thick, tangled rainforest standing yesterday evening simply gone, erased. In front of Sergeant Miller's M16 half-track, 200 yards, jungle stripped of bark, leaves, branches. Trees still standing like telephone poles sheared at chest height. Tall kite grass, 6 feet high, hiding enemy, mowed down to mud. Less like battlefield, more like Category 5 hurricane aftermath. The birdwatcher hadn't just killed enemy, it had landscaped island. But ground itself told true story. Road and clearing carpeted with wreckage of Japanese regiment. Bodies not scattered randomly, piled in heaps, stacked 3 and 4 deep in interlocking zones of fire where 4 machine guns converged. Official body count staggering, but numbers don't capture what .50 caliber rounds do to human wave. Infantrymen walking through carnage stepped carefully, ground slick with mud, blood, hydraulic fluid. Nearest enemy bodies 10 yards from half-track's front bumper, got close enough to scratch paint, but couldn't walk through wall of lead. Infantry commanders, same officers who tried to send half-track's rear, walked up to Miller's position. Speechless. Walked past exhausted crew slumped in cab, too tired to salute. Officers looked at M16, a wreck. Paint on gun barrels burned off, stark bone white. Grease on mounts cooked into black crust. Floor of fighting compartment buried under foot of brass shell casings. Metallic ocean glittering in morning sun. Thousands. Sheer weight of brass pressed truck suspension down. The mockery ended there. Jokes about birdwatcher evaporated into humid morning air. Infantrymen realized if this useless truck hadn't been here, if Miller hadn't disobeyed manual, driven into breach, every American in sector would be dead. Japanese would have rolled up line, captured supply dump, massacred division. Toy, supposed to hunt non-existent planes, just did work of 1,000 riflemen. Vindication absolute. Not spoken in speeches or medals, spoken in way infantrymen looked at gun, walked up to tracks, touched cold steel of armor, ran hands over burned-out barrels. Gesture of respect, almost religious awe. Not looking at machine anymore, looking at a savior. From that morning on, M16 half-track had new name. Birdwatcher buried in Luzon mud. Troops called it the meat chopper. Brutal, ugly, entirely accurate. Reflected terrifying reality of quad mount on infantry and open. Word spread through Pacific like wildfire. Every infantry commander heard story, demanded meat chopper for unit. Supply depots raided, manuals thrown out window. M16 ceased being anti-aircraft weapon, became premier jungle-clearing tool of United States Army, security blanket for every GI sleeping in foxhole. Quad mount on your flank, you knew you'd see sunrise. Sergeant Miller and crew became local legends, but didn't celebrate. Spent next day cleaning guns, scraping carbon, restocking tombstone chests. Knew war wasn't over. Knew another night, another Banzai charge. But something changed. Not outcasts anymore. Chow truck came. Infantry guys made sure half-track crew ate first. Mail call, grunts ran letters up to turret. Offered to dig latrines. Offered last packs of cigarettes. Currency of gratitude where money meant nothing. Useless men now rock stars of battalion. Meat chopper legacy didn't end World War II. Lesson Miller taught Army. Heavy volume of fire, ultimate problem solver, carried into next war. Korea, 5 years later, M16 pulled from storage. Again, supposed to shoot planes. Again, Chinese human waves poured over frozen hills. Old veterans remembered. Lowered guns, aimed flat. Meat chopper back to work, cutting waves of infantry in snow, just as in jungle. Proved technology might get old, but physics of .50 caliber bullet never expire. But like all war tools, M16 eventually faded. Jet age arrived. Planes flew too fast for human gunner. Missiles replaced machine guns. M16 retired. Towed to scrapyards, stripped for parts, left to rust. Steel that saved thousands melted down for Toyotas and washing machines. Specific half-track Sergeant Miller drove that night likely pile of oxidized metal in surplus depot. History forgotten by all but men behind it. Sergeant Miller survived war, went home to quiet life, worked hardware store, raised family, mowed lawns Sundays, rarely spoke of Philippines, didn't tell neighbors he commanded robot dragon that breathed fire, didn't tell them about night jungle tried to kill him, and he killed jungle back. But in quiet moments, car backfired or thunderstorm rolled in, mind went back to that road, remembered smell of burning barrels, remembered vibration of floorboards, remembered faces of kids in foxholes, wide, terrified eyes, realizing birdwatcher just saved their lives. But while Miller remembered, world moved on. Machines that saved them faded. Military Museum today, M16 in back corner, gathering dust. Tires flat, paint chipped, guns plugged. Most walk past to look at big tanks or fighter jets. But now you know better. Now you know this strange truck once held line against darkness, earned place in history not by doing what it was designed for, but by doing what it had to do. So next time someone calls a tool obsolete or a plan stupid, remember Sergeant Miller. Remember the 209th AA. Remember the meat chopper that erased a regiment. We dig through archives every week to find weapons history forgot. If you want to see the next restoration, hit subscribe and tell us in comments what other useless weapon turned out to be a game changer.